Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where words came flying out of your mouth before you even had time to pause, only to regret them moments later? Maybe it was with a friend who always seems to find a way to criticize you, or a family member who knows exactly which buttons to push, or even a co-worker who thrives on stirring up conflict. You walk away from the moment, heart racing, chest heavy, replaying the conversation in your head, and all you can think is, why did I let them get to me? Why didn't I just stay silent? It's a question we've all asked ourselves, often in the quiet of the night, when the weight of unnecessary arguments keeps us awake. There's something deeply frustrating about realizing that someone else's drama has stolen your peace. And yet, it happens more often than we'd like to admit. We live in a world where being heard has been equated with being strong. From a young age, many of us are taught to defend ourselves, to never let someone get the last word, to make sure we stand our ground no matter what. But standing your ground doesn't always look like shouting louder, having the sharpest comeback, or proving your point until the other person is worn out. Sometimes the deepest form of strength is choosing silence. Sometimes it's recognizing that your energy, your presence, your peace of mind are far too valuable to be tossed into the middle of chaos that doesn't deserve you. And yet, this truth can feel so counterintuitive, because when we're hurt, our instinct is to fight back. When someone wrongs us, silence feels like surrender. But what if it isn't? I want to invite you into a different way of looking at silence. Not as weakness, not as avoidance, but as maturity. Think back on the last time you got caught in someone else's drama. Maybe it was over something small like a petty comment or an unnecessary criticism. Maybe it was bigger, like a betrayal or a heated disagreement that left you emotionally bruised. Whatever the situation, what lingers is the sense that you were pulled into something that wasn't even truly about you. That's the tricky thing about drama. It disguises itself as urgent and important, but underneath, it's often about someone else's unhealed pain. And when we get tangled in it, we end up carrying their baggage on top of our own. The truth is, we've all been there. And it's not because we're weak or foolish. It's because we're human. We crave understanding. We want to be seen and respected. So when someone challenges us, disrespects us, or dismisses us, we feel this fire rise up inside. We think if we just explain ourselves enough, argue well enough, speak forcefully enough, then maybe they'll finally get it. But here's the hard part. People who thrive on drama aren't interested in understanding. They're interested in control, in chaos, in keeping the spotlight on the conflict itself. And the more you engage, the more you feed the cycle. This is where silence becomes radical. Because silence is not about giving up. It's about choosing not to participate in something that will never bring healing. It's about understanding that your peace is not negotiable. It's about saying, without words, I refuse to let your storm pull me under. And this is where emotional maturity reveals itself. Emotionally mature people don't need to win every argument. They don't need to prove their point to those unwilling to listen. They know that silence can sometimes be the loudest response of all. But I know, right now, some of you may be thinking, that's easier said than done. And you're right. Silence isn't natural when your heart is pounding and your pride is on the line. Silence doesn't come easily when you've spent years believing that defending yourself was the only way to survive. Silence doesn't feel safe when you're worried people might mistake it for weakness. But here's the shift that changes everything. Silence is not about them. It's about you. It's about your relationship with your own energy, your own dignity, your own sense of worth. Imagine for a moment that every time someone tried to bait you into conflict, you pictured your peace of mind as a precious jewel you were holding. Would you just hand it over to anyone who came along with negativity in their pocket? Or would you guard it carefully, knowing how priceless it is? Silence is that guard. Silence is the act of holding onto your jewel and saying, not today, not with me. What I've seen over and over is that when women, especially women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, begin to embrace silence as a form of maturity, something shifts deep inside them. They stop feeling the need to chase closure from people who will never give it. They stop rehearsing comebacks in their heads, long after the argument has ended. They stop giving their nights, their joy, their energy away to people who thrive on conflict. And slowly, they begin to taste a new kind of freedom. The freedom of not needing to be understood by everyone, but choosing instead to be at peace with themselves. And isn't that what we're all longing for at the end of the day? Not more arguments won, not more people convinced, not more energy poured into the void. We're longing for peace, for dignity, for a sense of calm in our own souls. And the surprising truth is that sometimes the doorway to that peace is found not in speaking, but in silence. Not in fighting harder, but in choosing not to fight at all. So here's the hope: if you've ever walked away from conflict and thought, "Why didn't I just stay silent?" You're not failing. You're awakening. You're noticing. And that awareness is the first step toward transformation. Every time you regret being pulled into drama, you're learning what your spirit truly longs for. You're remembering that peace is possible. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes to stand in silence, not as someone who's defeated, but as someone who knows her worth too deeply to waste it on unnecessary battles. And that's where I want to take you in this conversation. Because silence, when chosen wisely, is not emptiness, it's power. It's not surrender, it's strength. And once you begin to understand that, the way you move through drama will never be the same again. The problem is not that we don't know how to speak up. Most of us are more than capable of defending ourselves, of making our point, of standing our ground. The problem is that we've been taught to confuse constant reacting with strength, as if the louder we argue or the faster we respond, the more powerful we are. And that belief has cost us our peace. When we think back on the times we've been pulled into drama, very rarely do we walk away feeling proud of ourselves. More often, we walk away feeling drained, replaying the words in our heads, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, even weeks. We wonder if we said too much, or maybe not enough. We wonder if we should have chosen different words, if we should have stood up for ourselves more forcefully, or if we made ourselves look foolish by even engaging. And in those moments, what we're really wrestling with is not just the conflict itself, but the way it robbed us of our own sense of calm. It's easy to think this struggle belongs only to us, that somehow we're the only ones who can't seem to walk away quietly, the only ones who regret our words after the fire has cooled. But the truth is, it's one of the most common experiences in the world. We are wired for connection. We long to be understood, to be seen, to be respected. And when someone disrespects us, when they dismiss our feelings, when they twist our words, it feels unbearable to simply sit in silence. Something deep inside of us rises up and demands, "Say something, prove yourself, don't let them get away with that." And so we do. We argue. We explain, we defend. We try to wrestle understanding out of people who are not capable or not willing to give it. But here's where the misunderstanding lies. We think that speaking up in those moments is about reclaiming our dignity. What actually happens is that we hand over our power. Because people who thrive on drama are not listening to our words. They're feeding on our reaction. The more we defend ourselves, the more tangled we become in their web. The more we explain, the less they hear. The more we try to prove ourselves, the more invisible we feel. And when it's all over, we are left carrying not just the weight of the original hurt, but also the shame of having been pulled into something that didn't deserve us. For women especially, this cycle feels even more complicated. Many of us grew up in environments where our voices were either dismissed or silenced, so we learned to fight for space, to defend our worth, to push back when we felt unseen. And in many ways, that fight has been necessary. It has shaped our courage. But sometimes, that same instinct to defend ourselves keeps us tethered to battles that are not worth fighting. We end up confusing noise with power, forgetting that true power often comes in the form of restraint. And so we find ourselves caught in this exhausting loop: fight, regret, promise to do better, and then, the next time drama finds us, we fall into the same trap again. The hardest part is that this problem doesn't always look like a problem at first. It looks like standing up for ourselves. It looks like courage. It looks like honesty. And sometimes it is. There are absolutely moments when speaking is necessary, when silence would mean betraying ourselves. but that is not the same as being pulled into every storm that passes by. The problem is not that we speak. The problem is that we don't always know when to stop, when to walk away, when to hold our peace and let our silence be the answer. Think about how many times you've been in an argument that spiraled far beyond the original issue. Maybe it started with a small misunderstanding. Maybe it began with a criticism that didn't sit right with you. But instead of staying anchored, you got swept up. Before you knew it, voices were raised, hearts were pounding, and you were saying things that didn't even reflect who you are. By the end of it, nothing was resolved, and instead of clarity, you were left with chaos. That's the trap of drama. It pulls us in with the illusion of resolution, but rarely delivers it. And this is why so many of us carry quiet guilt and shame after conflict. We know better. We know that getting pulled into someone else's storm never leaves us whole. But in the moment, our need to defend ourselves outweighs our desire for peace. And that's what makes this problem so common, yet so misunderstood. People assume that those who engage in drama do so because they enjoy it, because they crave conflict. But that's not true for most of us. Most of us don't enjoy it at all. What we crave is respect. What we crave is to feel heard. What we crave is to know that our feelings matter. And so we fight for it, even when the fight costs us more than silence ever would. This is where the validation matters. If you've ever walked away from a heated moment and thought, why can't I just keep quiet? Why do I always let them get under my skin? You're not alone, and you're not weak. You're human. You're responding to a very real need, the need to belong, to be valued, to be seen as worthy of care. The problem is not your longing to be understood. The problem is where that longing takes you when you place it in the hands of people who can't meet you there. When we start to see this clearly, we realize that the real issue is not the other person's words. It's not even the drama itself. The issue is the way we've learned to give our energy away without asking whether it's worth the cost. The issue is that we haven't always been taught that silence can be just as strong, sometimes even stronger than speaking. And until we understand that, we'll keep falling into the same pattern, replaying the same regrets, wondering why peace feels so far away. The good news is, once you can name the problem, you can begin to change it. But it starts with honesty. Honesty about how much it hurts to be caught in conflict. Honesty about how exhausting it is to always be defending yourself. Honesty about how deeply you long for peace. And that honesty becomes the first step in breaking free. Because when you can look at the problem clearly, without shame, you open the door to a new way of living. And that new way begins with silence chosen, not silence forced. What emotionally mature people understand is something many of us don't learn until much later in life. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every word deserves a response. And not every conflict is ours to carry. At first glance, this truth feels like surrender, as if refusing to engage means we've somehow lost. But what if it's the opposite? What if silence is not weakness but wisdom? What if silence is not avoidance but self-respect? What if the most powerful statement we can make is not with our voices, but with our choice to stay still? Think about how drama works. It thrives on reaction. It feeds on your energy, your words, your emotions. Imagine someone throwing a lit match into dry grass. The fire only grows if there's fuel. In the same way, conflict only spreads when we add words, defenses, or arguments. Choosing silence is like refusing to add fuel. The fire fizzles when you don't feed it. But here's where the twist comes. Most of us don't see silence this way. We've been told our entire lives that if we don't stand up immediately, if we don't defend ourselves, if we don't fight back, then we're weak, or we're letting people walk all over us. That's the lie that keeps us trapped. Because silence, when chosen intentionally, is not passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It's a boundary. I once knew a woman who said, "The best decision I ever made was to stop explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me." That sentence alone holds so much power. How often do we find ourselves trying to explain our hearts to people who are not listening? How often do we waste our breath on those who twist our words or use our vulnerability as ammunition? And how often do we walk away, not only unheard, but also empty, drained of the very energy we need to care for ourselves? What this woman discovered, And what so many emotionally mature people eventually learn is that silence can be the most powerful boundary. It says without a single word, I value myself too much to pour energy into a place where it will never bear fruit. There's something profoundly surprising about realizing that silence is not about the other person. It's about us. It's not about controlling the outcome or winning the argument. It's about choosing peace over chaos, dignity over desperation, stillness over spirals. And this realization often comes after years of being pulled into battles that left us weary and wondering if there was another way. I remember listening to a story about a woman in her 50s who had spent her whole life defending herself to her siblings. Every family gathering seemed to turn into an opportunity for someone to bring up her past mistakes, her choices, her flaws. For decades, she fought back. She explained. She justified. She defended her life like it was a courtroom trial. And every time, she left those gatherings exhausted, feeling like she had been stripped of her worth all over again. Then one day, she decided to do something different. When the jabs came, she didn't respond. When the criticism flew, she stayed quiet. She smiled, changed the subject, or walked away. At first, her siblings pushed harder, frustrated that their usual hooks weren't working. But eventually, they stopped. And for the first time in years, she walked away from those gatherings with her peace intact. She told me later, it wasn't about them changing, it was about me changing. The moment I stopped giving them fuel, the fire went out. This is the counterintuitive truth. Silence doesn't make us powerless. It makes us untouchable. It teaches us that we don't have to attend every argument we're invited to. We don't have to prove ourselves in conversations that were never designed to honor us. We don't have to hand over our energy to anyone who demands it. We get to choose, and that choice is where maturity is born. What often surprises people is that silence is not the absence of communication. Silence communicates volumes. It says, I will not be dragged into this. It says, my peace matters more than your approval. It says, I know my worth, and I don't need to prove it. Silence is language in its purest form. It is dignity expressed without explanation. But here's the nuance. Silence is not about stuffing down your feelings. It's not about pretending you're unaffected or building a wall around your heart. It's about discernment, knowing when speaking serves your soul and when silence protects it. It's about asking yourself, will my words bring clarity or will they feed chaos? That question alone can transform the way you move through conflict. Because when you pause long enough to ask it, you give yourself the space to choose differently. The research on emotional regulation shows us that people who can pause, who can hold back their immediate reactions, are not suppressing their feelings. They are channeling them wisely. They are giving their nervous systems time to settle, giving their brains time to re-engage with logic rather than being hijacked by adrenaline. This is why silence is powerful. It is not an act of shutting down. It is an act of self-regulation, of refusing to let someone else dictate the state of your body, your mind, your soul. And here's the deeper layer. Choosing silence often reveals more about the other person than it does about you. When you no longer play the game, you get to watch who they are without your participation. Do they escalate? Do they calm down? Do they walk away? Do they look confused when you don't bite? Your silence becomes a mirror, showing their true colors, and that clarity is priceless. So often, we believe that in order to protect ourselves, we need to fight harder, shout louder, explain more. But what emotionally mature people know is that the fight itself is the trap. By refusing to engage, they step outside the game altogether. They conserve their energy for the people and places that truly matter. And this is the wisdom most of us discover only after years of unnecessary battles. Peace is not found in winning arguments. Peace is found in refusing to be pulled into them in the first place. What changes when you embrace this insight is not just how you handle conflict, but how you see yourself. You stop viewing silence as an absence and start seeing it as a presence of strength, of wisdom, of deep self-trust. You begin to believe that you don't need to shout to be heard because you already hear yourself. You don't need to prove your worth because you already know it. And you don't need to respond to every provocation because you've finally realized that not every storm deserves your energy. That's the surprising truth that sets you free. Silence is not about giving up. It's about rising above. It's not about shrinking down. It's about standing tall in your own calm. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes, until one day, you realize that the drama that once consumed you no longer has the power to touch you. So, how do we take this insight and actually apply it in our daily lives? How do we stop getting pulled into every argument, every heated exchange, every drama that comes our way, and instead preserve our energy, our dignity, and our peace? The first step is to recognize that silence is not a passive act. It is an active choice. It's a decision made in the moment, a conscious refusal to hand over your emotional energy to someone else's chaos. And making that choice requires practice, because old patterns are strong, and our instincts will still scream at us to react. But the more we practice, the more natural it becomes, and the more we realize that our power is not in responding, but in choosing not to respond when it serves no purpose. One practical way to begin is to pause before reacting. When someone provokes you, when criticism lands, when a familiar pattern of drama begins to emerge, give yourself even a few seconds to breathe, to center yourself, to notice your body's reaction before you speak. This small pause is deceptively powerful. It allows you to step out of autopilot and ask yourself, do my words here serve my peace, or do they feed the storm? That single question is the gateway to emotional maturity. It is the moment where you reclaim control. Because instead of being hijacked by someone else's chaos, you are choosing how you will engage, or whether you will engage at all. Another important step is learning to choose where your voice matters. Not every opinion, not every comment, not every criticism deserves your response. There is a profound freedom in directing your energy to spaces and people where your words will be received with respect and understanding. When you begin to see your words as precious resources, you start using them strategically, rather than scattering them indiscriminately into conflicts that will never be resolved. This is not about ignoring problems, but about discerning which battles are worth your energy and which ones are not. Setting boundaries is another key part of this practice. Boundaries are not about being cold or uncaring. They are about protecting your emotional and mental health. When someone repeatedly tries to pull you into drama, you can respond not with words, but with action. You can walk away from the conversation. You can limit contact with people who thrive on conflict. You can change the subject, or remove yourself from the environment entirely. Each of these choices communicates a powerful message that your peace is non-negotiable, that you will not participate in cycles of chaos, and that you are taking responsibility for your own well-being. Boundaries are a practical, everyday way to enforce the wisdom of silence. Reframing silence as strength is also essential. Many of us have been conditioned to see quietness in the face of conflict as weakness or fear, but the reality is quite the opposite. Every time you hold back from engaging in unnecessary drama, you are exercising courage. Every time you refuse to give your energy to someone else's chaos, you are showing maturity and self-respect. Instead of judging yourself for not reacting, remind yourself that your silence is a conscious, deliberate act of protection and power. By framing it this way, the practice of silence becomes empowering rather than punishing. It's important to acknowledge the discomfort that comes with this practice. At first, staying silent feels unnatural. Your instincts, honed over years of defending yourself, will protest. You may feel vulnerable, exposed, or even guilty for not engaging. You may worry that people will see your silence as weakness. This is normal. It is part of the process of rewiring your emotional responses. The discomfort signals that you are breaking free from old patterns, and that is exactly what needs to happen for growth. Over time, you will notice that the discomfort fades, and what replaces it is a quiet confidence, a steady inner strength, and a sense of calm that drama can no longer disturb. Another practical tool is to create mental scripts for yourself. Anticipate common situations that tend to trigger drama in your life, and decide in advance how you will respond. Sometimes a simple phrase like, "I'm choosing not to engage right now," or "I'm stepping away from my own peace," is enough to remind you to hold your silence. These scripts act as anchors in moments when your emotions are high and your mind wants to react. They remind you that silence is not a void, but a deliberate, powerful choice. Learning to shift your focus inward is also crucial. When drama arises, instead of pouring attention outward to manage someone else's behavior, redirect your energy inward. Focus on your breath, on your posture, on your thoughts. Ask yourself, what do I need right now to preserve my peace? This shift of attention is transformative. It moves you from being reactive to being proactive, from being a participant in chaos to being the guardian of your own emotional landscape. Another aspect of practicing silence is learning to accept that you cannot control others. One of the hardest lessons in emotional maturity is understanding that no matter how perfectly you phrase your words, no matter how logically you argue, some people will not understand, will not listen, and will not change. Accepting this truth is liberating. It frees you from the illusion that your voice is required to fix everything. Your responsibility is not to control other people's responses, it is to protect your own peace. Finally, patience is key. Silence is a skill that takes time to develop. You will not master it overnight, and there will be moments when you fall back into old patterns. That is part of being human. The important thing is to recognize those moments without judgment and recommit to the practice. Each time you choose silence over reaction, each time you step away instead of arguing, you are building a new pattern of emotional maturity, reinforcing the truth that your peace is your most valuable asset. As you integrate these practices into your life, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to feel lighter. The tension that once seemed unavoidable in interactions with certain people begins to dissolve. You notice that you no longer carry the weight of others' chaos with you because you've learned how to protect your energy. You become less reactive, more composed, and more confident in your own worth. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to understand that silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is not surrender, it is strength. In the end, this is the transformation that comes from applying the solution. Every time you choose silence intentionally, you are choosing yourself. You are choosing your well-being over needless conflict, your dignity over petty arguments, and your calm over chaos. You are learning to move through life with a steady heart, unshaken by drama, unbound by the need to prove yourself, and anchored in the knowledge that true power often lies in knowing when to speak and when to remain quiet. Now imagine for a moment what life looks like when you begin to fully embrace this practice. When silence becomes not a tool you use occasionally, but a natural part of your response, a reflection of your inner strength. Picture waking up in the morning without the heavy weight of last night's arguments pressing down on your chest. Picture leaving family gatherings or social events without the familiar ache of having been drawn into conflict that never needed your energy in the first place. Picture moving through your day with a calm that others sense but cannot disturb, a serenity that radiates from you because you have finally learned the profound art of choosing your battles wisely. This is not an imaginary fantasy. It is attainable, and it begins with the small, deliberate choices you make today. When you allow silence to become your default response to unnecessary drama, something shifts inside of you. The first thing you notice is freedom. You are no longer tethered to the emotional storms of others. You no longer carry the burden of trying to manage people who are not ready, willing, or capable of being managed. That freedom is intoxicating because it comes with clarity. You begin to see people and situations for what they truly are, without the distortion that comes from constant emotional entanglement. You recognize who truly deserves your attention, your energy, your words, and who does not. And with that recognition comes empowerment. You begin to feel the steady confidence that arises when you know you are no longer giving away pieces of yourself to those who do not value them. With this freedom comes a deeper, more tender kind of self-compassion. When you are no longer reacting to every provocation, you create space to nurture your own needs. You start listening to yourself in ways you never have before. You notice your heart whispering what it needs: quiet, rest, reflection, and the gentle affirmation that you are enough exactly as you are. Emotional maturity, in its most profound form, is not only about choosing silence, but also about choosing yourself repeatedly, day after day, in the face of a world that often encourages the opposite. It is the practice of self-preservation that feels as sacred as any other act of care. The beauty of this transformation is that it extends beyond the personal into every relationship you hold. When you are no longer reactive, people around you begin to adjust their behavior as well. Some may be confused at first, unsure why you no longer rise to their provocations. Others may attempt to pull you back into the old patterns. But with consistency, they learn that you are steady, unshaken, and that your silence carries a power that cannot be bargained with or manipulated. This doesn't mean you are unkind or disengaged. On the contrary, your relationships become more authentic, more grounded, because they are no longer based on cycles of reaction and counter-reaction. People who truly value you recognize your strength, and those who do not eventually fall away, leaving space for more nourishing connections. As this practice deepens, you begin to notice the subtle but profound ways it changes your inner world. Stress that once seemed unavoidable begins to dissipate. Anxiety tied to past conflicts loses its grip. You start to approach conversations, meetings, and interactions with a sense of ease that was previously unimaginable. Even when others attempt to provoke, your response, or lack thereof, is measured, deliberate, and self-respecting. You understand that not every opinion needs validation, not every insult needs rebuttal, and not every situation requires your intervention. This understanding alone brings a level of peace that is hard to overstate. Over time, silence also teaches you patience, and not the superficial kind that waits for time to pass, but a profound, grounded patience that rests in the knowledge that things will unfold as they should, whether you intervene or not. You begin to recognize that life's challenges, the conflicts, the misunderstandings, and the provocations are not always your responsibility to fix. Some problems are meant to resolve themselves. Some people are meant to teach lessons through their actions without requiring your commentary. And when you step back and allow this natural unfolding, you find that your energy is preserved, your spirit remains intact, and your presence becomes a beacon of steadiness in a world often dominated by chaos. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this transformation is the joy it brings. Joy not dependent on external validation, not contingent on the reactions of others, but joy that arises from a deeply rooted sense of self, possession, and inner peace. You wake up grateful for the small victories of calm in your life. The moments when you resisted the urge to respond, the times you walked away from unnecessary conflict, the quiet awareness that your silence is actually a declaration of self-respect. That joy is contagious, radiating outward into your relationships, your work, and your daily life. Others sense it, and even if they cannot define it, they are drawn to it, not because of what you say, but because of who you have become. With this transformation, you also gain a renewed sense of clarity about your own values and priorities. When you are no longer constantly reacting, you have space to reflect on what truly matters. You notice the energy you want to invest, the people you want to spend your time with, the boundaries that are non-negotiable. You recognize that your peace is not an optional luxury, but a core necessity for your emotional well-being. And with this clarity comes confidence. Confidence in your choices, confidence in your boundaries, confidence in your ability to navigate life without surrendering your energy to chaos that does not serve you. And finally, this transformation invites you to act with both courage and compassion. Courage, because it is not always easy to remain silent when provoked, to stand firm in your dignity, and to resist the pull of drama. Compassion, because you come to understand that those who provoke are often acting from their own wounds and fears, and that your silence does not mean judgment, but rather protection. For yourself and for your emotional well-being. You are no longer trapped by the illusion that engagement equals resolution. You are free to respond with wisdom, presence, and self-respect. This is the life that awaits when you fully embrace silence as strength, a life marked by calm, clarity, and confidence, relationships defined by authenticity rather than chaos, and a daily experience of peace that comes from knowing your energy is yours to protect. You move through the world with a quiet authority, unshaken by the storms others may try to drag you into, and anchored in the knowledge that your inner peace is your most valuable possession. And as you live this way, your story becomes a powerful testament to the fact that emotional maturity is not about winning arguments or proving yourself, but about choosing wisely, acting deliberately, and honoring yourself in every moment. So take a moment to envision that life, not as a distant dream, but as a very real possibility. Imagine feeling the relief of letting go of conflicts that do not serve you. Imagine feeling the quiet joy of self, respect that is not dependent on anyone else's understanding. Imagine waking up each day with clarity, calm, and the freedom to invest your energy where it truly belongs. That is the transformation awaiting you. That is the peace you have been seeking. And that peace begins with the simple, profound choice to step back, to hold your silence, and to honor yourself above all else.